Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Amanda and I'm an aspiring health coach. On this channel, I talk about health and wellness topics in the context of being a psychiatric survivor. I am still exploring the best route to starting my own business as a health coach, including which certifications to get. And I started this self-education process, I want to say, maybe 4 or 5 months ago. I just sort of decided one day on a weekend that I was going to become a health coach who specializes in helping people get off and stay off psychiatric medications. And in the self-education zeal, I have been reading, covering material that I used to know, things I used to study as a personal trainer. I figured that I would get recertified as a personal trainer and then become a health coach to deepen my knowledge. And what I want to talk about today might seem to be quite the non sequitur, because today I'm going to tell my deconversion story. And I promise there's relevance if you just like to follow health and wellness channels. The reason why I had to make a video on this topic is that it's something that I've not really written about or talked about at length. That was a pretty big deal in my life, at least in my interior life, in my mental life, if you will. And the reason why I am dealing with it again now is that in my reading diet, let's say, in my attempt to throw my arms around some new body of knowledge and sift from it a sort of knowledge that I could see developing a skill set around that would be actually marketable to people. I very quickly went from reading books about endocrinology to and physiology and textbooks for somebody who's a strength and conditioning coach to energy healing, chakras, Reiki, meditation, brainwaves, to self-help, back to religion. So there was this detour that was happening intellectually with me that I felt like, okay, this is nice, but let's address it for what it is. And it really reawakened in me a lot of the emotions that I dealt with a few years ago when I deconverted from a strain of Christianity that was very charismatic. So I'm going to try to pack it in here and make sense chronologically, because I keep using the word frustrated, but I'm not upset, I'm not unhappy, I'm not discontent. I'm always happiest when I have a mild intellectual obsession going on. So one of the things that makes me really enjoy life and helps to bring me out of a depression, if I am in a depression, is to have an intellectual obsession or a vein of interest that I pursue until I am satisfied that I have really advanced on my previous knowledge and potentially the knowledge of others. Not that it's a competitive thing with me, but it's something that this has always been the case with me. If I decide that I want to study a particular topic, then I tend to get very involved in the research of that topic. I guess that would just make me a nerd, right? Like the majority of the users of the internet, I feel like these days. It's very common. That's why people use the term rabbit hole. I am really happy in a rabbit hole. I find that it lifts me up and I don't even sweat moods or have mood swings when I am when I'm motivated to learn something very specific. So along those lines, why did I end up here? I think that it says something about the state of our culture, the state of health and information, that once you step outside of PubMed articles, that you are in this sort of wild cornucopia of esoteric ideas very quickly that is tied to alternative health practices. There is a very deep history of the convergence of spirituality and healing in human societies. That is not my area of expertise. I'm not a historian. But so it should surprise no one that I had to reconfront some spiritual angst that I thought I had put to bed because I was being exposed to materials that basically rehashed the conflict that drove me away from evangelical Christianity. But before I get into that, I want to get into what drove me towards evangelical Christianity, and it involves mental illness and suffering. So I hope that no one else who's listening to this really has to go through exactly the same thing, although I wouldn't say I regret it. But the fact of the matter is that I wasn't raised an evangelical. I was raised with a different form of Christianity that I no longer adhere to at all, but I was brought in because I was proselytized to by a couple of an evangelical married couple who befriended me when I was in a very, very, very bad suicidal depression. And because of their intervention, they may have saved my life. So kudos, thank you to them for doing that. But that is the kind of suffering that I hope I will never go through again. I hope that no one who is a client, potentially, of mine will ever have to go through again. And would I say that they took advantage of it? I would say that they took advantage of it only in the lightest I say that without a lot of judgment or scorn. I see everything that happened as necessary for my own intellectual, I won't call it growth, but I will say it's just an experience. It's an intellectual experience that I had. So let me start from the beginning. I was born and raised in the Bible Belt in Lubbock, Texas, in the panhandle in West Texas, where there are more churches than convenience stores, more churches than gas stations, and people are really, really adamant about their churches, and their particular flavor and denominations are very, very loud, let's say. People are loud Christians there. So in the middle of that kind of culture, I used to say there are more churches than there are gas stations, because everybody can use 3 types of gas, but nobody can agree on whether or not Adam had a navel, and it's like ridiculous. So I didn't think a lot about the effect that type of environment had on me, because I was raised in a household where my father's side was pretty much atheist. They didn't observe at all, and didn't really discuss why that would be. They were just culturally not religious people. And my mother's side was Episcopalian, and I went to a private Episcopal school until I was in 9th grade, where we went to chapel. We were acolytes. The Episcopal Church was very important to my mother's mother, who was very important to me. So I really identified with my denomination and my faith, as it were, from an early age. However, the faith was juxtaposed against these fierier denominations of Bible thumpers who took the Bible literally, and also it was juxtaposed against the Catholic Church, from which it emerged through the whole Henry VIII needs to bang a new woman type of schism. Okay, so that was another little joke of mine when I was a child. I used to sarcastically say that we went to the Church of Divorce, because it emerged from divorce, and everybody's parents everybody had divorced parents. So so I didn't see myself as having been traumatized or damaged by Christianity whatsoever, because I belonged to what I later came to see as a very diluted, progressive Christianity. Politically, we were progressive, but I didn't really think of it as such, because our church was more formal. So it was like for people who wanted to have this high church ritual liturgy while holding more liberal views about, say, women in the clergy, gay people getting married, gay people being ordained. We just weren't going to toe the line. I remember most of the priests that I grew up under at school were women. I think in hindsight that was pretty cool. I liked that. But, I mean, it's kind of irrelevant now because I think that what they were doing was promoting the Christian faith without being pure about doctrinal issues at all, because it was a loose cultural institution that basically at that point it was about culture rather than belief. So for example, even though as a child and as an adolescent I was expected to have a lot of respect for ritual and ceremony, by, for instance, knowing exactly what to do at the altar when being an acolyte and reading scripture and taking turns and having all of these chores. So my grandmother was the head of the, I don't know what it was called. I forget the terminology. There would be formal terminology for everything. Everything was pretty formal. So there was all of that, but behind that, there wasn't a lot of like purity culture pushed on us. We didn't have discussions about, you know, if you have premarital sex and God, what does God want you to do with your sex life and what else? You know, we weren't getting involved in pro-life movements, none of that. That would have been very, very distasteful, frankly, to be honest with you. And another thing about the church that I grew up under that I came to later really appreciate when it was gone, when I was no longer part of that church, is that Episcopalian priests tend to be extremely learned and erudite. So we don't, they wouldn't expect us to live biblically, but it was more of an expectation that we have more of a grasp of the Bible as a literary and historical document than I think other churches expect of their flock. So when, for example, an Episcopal priest would give a sermon, to me it was like the best part. I always look forward to that part of the service. Was the best part. It was like we have to do all of this other stuff so that we can get to this part. So but it would be a pretty honest, scholarly take on whatever the passage that it was, whatever scripture it was based on, whatever the scriptural passages were, that the readings. So they might be up there lecturing and educating about the context, and from that I think I had the opportunity to imbibe a lot of history that I don't think I've seen just generally out there in the Christian knowledge base. Like, you just can't assume that a Christian from another denomination understands the happenings of antiquity the way that maybe I did if I really listen closely. So the priest would be careful to situate things in terms of history, which would mean that they were quite learned in things outside the Bible, which I both appreciate, but now makes me even just raises the hair on the back of my neck, because in a way, I told my boyfriend this the other day. I said, I don't know what is worse. The fact that you have all these people out here who take the Bible to be this sacred work produced by God, directly or indirectly, and it is inerrant. And so we have to do everything, quote unquote, by the book, because the book is literally the end all be all of truth, and so on. The stakes are quite high, and so on and so forth. What is worse? That, okay, when you read the Bible, that's pretty bad. I mean, it's really bad. Or what I was raised in was a group of people who knew that, for instance, the Bible was not literally true, who knew that there were no such thing as Adam and Eve, who were educated at seminary and then turned into these sort of, how to put it, moral apologists or cultural apologists, where instead of the Bible being literally true, these are cultural artifacts from which we are going to pretend like they're true because we like the message in it, and we value the tradition of, say, patriarchy enough that we are going. And even then it's like, well, does the Episcopal Church even value patriarchy? What the hell is going on, right? So I don't know which is worse. People who believe in this fairy story, blah, 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 phantasmagoria of gore and blood and guilt and emotional blackmail and, just really bizarre shit. I mean, really fucking bizarre shit. Or people who are like, yeah, no, like, it's not true, but can we just, what? Because how will we henceforward oppress women if we can, can we just, like, how? And no, my church was actually attacked by other Christians for being too progressive. I remember once when I was in my 20s and I had moved to Pennsylvania and I went back to visit my family in Texas, and I went to my home parish, a particular band of fundamentalists from Kansas had driven down to picket, they were protesting with signs and picketing my church because we had ordained a gay man. Yes, that was the thing. We had officially opened up the priesthood to gay people, and this was a bridge too far and we were going to burn in hell. And that's what they were saying. They were literally saying things like, you're going to burn in hell, God hates fags, I think literally on their signs. And of course, because I had been raised in the Bible Belt, I was just like, whatever, because these people are, I was raised to believe that other forms of Protestantism were populated, like the charismatics in particular, were kooky. It was kind of like, oh, we're gonna, like, they didn't explicitly teach us this, but it was kind of like in whispers. You learn from your elders, like, these are the attitudes, like, those people are great, avoid, please don't do that. Mostly because it's déclassé, like, we look down on them as being, a little more, so anyway, that was my upbringing. Was not burdensome psychologically, the way that I've heard so many testimonies. So anyway, so then what happened? So then when I was directly out of high school, I fell in love with a convert to Catholicism, and we got married when I was 19, and I converted, and he kind of made it a stipulation that I convert to Catholicism, so I did. I didn't think it would be that big of a deal because I was raised in a church with a liturgy and a Eucharist, and everything was very familiar in terms of, we had our Mass that we called Eucharist, and then I was just like, okay, whatever, no big deal. Like, I get to pick a saint. I was into the saints. I was actually kind of like relishing it because in my opinion, it was more traditional and more authentic. And this was also the opinion of my new husband, who himself became a convert because he had been adopted through Catholic Family Services. He was given up by his birth mother and family. So he credits them with his life, literally. So, and plus it appealed to him politically. Conservative ideology was a huge part of his worldview. So, I tried to be the good wife, and I tried to be a part of that, and I did adopt a lot of his right-wing views initially. That crashed. But in terms of being a Catholic, we lived in an area where also so many people were Catholic. Again, I just was kind of adapting socially. In hindsight, I was adapting socially, and I know that may make me sound somewhat superficial, but I was a young person, and I guess I tried to treat the confirmation process and the conversion process with as much weight and gravity as it deserved, but I was also just living my life too. Okay, so let's say that. I was just living my life, and at times I would read Christian works or Christian mysticism or devotionals, and that was kind of a peace-giving time. But I remember one year after I graduated from college, I had to tell my husband that I just wasn't pro-life. I didn't believe that it was wrong for a woman to kill her child in her womb because it's her womb. And then he said that he would have to leave me. If he had, I think it would have been a boon. I think it would have saved me 3 more years of grief. But he didn't, and we carried on. So, it was causing interpersonal conflict. But it was something that kind of got waylaid by other events and priorities in life. So let's fast forward. Eventually I got a divorce, and I really just started to identify as an atheist. I saw a lot of the power politics and the church and the use of these traditional hierarchies as mostly exposing of the faith as a very human institution that I didn't think had any more relevance or place in my life. And it was also, this was happening, to give a little more context. I was married in 2000, okay, and then I divorced in 2009. So this entire decade was one in which the Catholic Church was exposed to be harboring some of the most vile and prolific sexual predators. So yeah, that happened, and to me, it just kind of dovetailed with what was going on internally, where I just saw it as, the scales fell from my eyes, so to speak, and I just saw it as a fallible, corrupt, outdated institution full of people that I didn't need to please anymore. I didn't need to please them. I didn't need to fit in. Let's fast forward to 2017. And for years, I guess I had been people would ask me about my faith, and I would describe myself as 96% atheist and 4% mystical Catholic. Because there would be times in my life when I would reach, I guess you could say, hypomania, mania, maybe, if you would like to really track it, I suppose. And I would become very, very enchanted with, the idea of having an elevated spiritual life, of prayer and meditation. And I would entertain notions about becoming a nun, even. I know this, when you're in mania, you really open up to a lot. So, and sometimes I would go to mass, on the regular. No one knew me. I didn't want to hang out afterwards, but I would enjoy being in that place and thinking about metaphysical things. And then it would just stop. So, I would also be a seeker, which is something that I don't like about myself. If you're a seeker, you're a seeker. It's like an itch that flares up that you can't quite get to scratch. If you have it, you have it. And I've always envied people who don't, because it doesn't really provide me with a lot of peace. I feel very restless. I always have, to be honest with you, because I don't think anything that's on offer has really sort of clicked. Although there have been times when I have reached a subjective point, a subjective state, an altered state of heightened emotional arousal, of bliss, of peace, that, if you reach that state, you tend to play attribution games. It tends to stimulate you to ascribe that feel-good rush of endorphins or what have you. Oxytocin is a player in this, literally. They have studied this. But if you have that, then you tend to attach to whatever your current belief system is, or, So bear that in mind when you listen to a lot of people's testimonials about whatever particular practice. They know that there is a chemical process going on in that person. And I'm not saying that invalidates or negates everybody's testimony, but I'm saying in me, I have felt that, I have dealt with that. And it's incredibly intoxicating. And it takes a lot of time for you to approach things with a cooler, less amped up, more, I guess, left brain lens. So anyway, so what happened in 2017? In 2017, I had a series of events in my life that took me into the darkest place to that point. The darkest, most, how would I describe it? a depression that was really loud, sustained, and incredibly vicious. And it's almost psychotic, but also weirdly functional, which is why I think it became as suicidal as it was. So let me explain. Okay, so what had happened in 2016, late 2016 and early 2017, I had instigated and led a union campaign at a restaurant where I was a waitress, because I was wantonly exploited, and so was everyone else. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna do something about this. So we did, and that is actually a really great time. I really valued that. I will never regret that. But it was very difficult, very hard for me, because I lost terribly, and emotionally. I tell people this is the truth, that losing that campaign was harder on me emotionally than my divorce. I wouldn't say it was harder on me than my marriage, but my divorce was pretty, like, when I finally got there after 7.5 years of a really rocky, volatile back and forth relationship that people would call, I don't know, toxic, but I was young, so in hindsight, I just see it as this was necessary. I don't really try to regret it now, I don't try to force regret. That's the point of that. So anyway, but the divorce process itself was like, we were so over, it was like all over but the paperwork. So when I say it was easier than that. It was easier than the divorce paperwork, okay? Because I watched 37 people whom I had really loved and was really, had taken risk for, and I watched them stab me in the back, frankly. So that happened, and then I was fired. Surprise, surprise. And I was already in poverty. I was already living in a ghetto, in a single boarding house room where I'd been for 3 years. So I'll make another video about privilege and health and, what I learned from being that poor. But I was in a dark place. I was isolated. I was not in a relationship. I had come back to the States and moved to an area where I had friends before, but I'd been gone for a number of years, pursuing jobs and living in the Virgin Islands, and then came back and everybody else had moved on, and so I was professionally shit out of luck. I was in a very dangerous, scary neighborhood. It had been 3 years. I was unemployed. The bright spot of that year was that I had written a novel years before, and I had finally found a publisher for it. So that was actually my life's dream come true right there. And then that summer, after I lost my job, my stepmother became very, very, very ill because she went in to have heart surgery, and because she was a severe diabetic who'd already experienced a kidney transplant, she basically went in for surgery and she just never really came out. But she languished and suffered in a near comatose state for almost that entire summer, while my family and her family had to let her go, but there was a lot of strife and there was disagreement, and my father My father then became way more of a problem than he had been in years. He started drinking again, and he did some very ugly things. He was off the rails, and I was sort of listening to all this at a distance. I did not go to be there, thank God. I don't think that would have been good for me at all. But it was a lot of problems. It opened up a lot of wounds. It opened up old wounds. It created new wounds. For example, my father sexually assaulted my stepmother's best friend the week of my stepmother's funeral. Okay, and that is how the two evangelicals came into my life. Okay, we'll call them Patty and Rick. So I had also been informed that my novel was going to be published, and then it was published, and I didn't really celebrate because it literally happened the week that my stepmother died. So I didn't it was just bad timing. And then that happened. So that she died, I think September 10th. And then in November, I was informed by my publisher that she had had a heart attack and needed to pull my novel. So for 2 months, I got to have my live stream come true, and then it was yanked away, I thought. So that particular news was the straw that broke the camel's back. And I snapped. It's pretty rare that I can say, like, I usually, if I am going to enter a state of symptomatic mood swing, prior to this, I couldn't tell you that there was a definitive point or some blow, except for one other time. But most of the time, it followed a pattern of, you gradually over time become manic, or you become depressed, and then you realize later, okay, yeah. But it was within one day, and there was no coming out of it. It was I hated the world. I was so angry, and I was in so much pain. I was grieving. I was rageful. I was having emotional flashbacks. I think a lot of it had to do with my rage and frustration, and the flashbacks because of what my father's behavior had become. I snapped. When I received the word that my book, which was the only thing that could redeem the whole year, frankly, was going to be pulled from publication, I snapped. And, I just think it was a series of situational things, that it was a situational perfect storm, which bred a very, very intense depression, which led to me becoming very close to Patty, my stepmother's best friend, who was groped by my father while she was trying to help him prepare to bury my it's so I know but this, so welcome to my world. Welcome to my family. Sorry, I don't know what yours is like, but this is mine. So anyway, I became really close to her because now I was in free fall, but I was really drawn in. I was really drawn in because, and I also had a lot of guilt going. I had a lot of guilt for not being there in the first place for my stepmother. Then when my father did what he did, I had a lot of even more guilt for not being there because I believed cognitive distortions of an adult child of an alcoholic, right? That if I had been there, I believe that what would have happened is my father would have tried to fight with me physically, and maybe then that would have deflected. But because I wasn't there, he was going to do this instead. I see his sexual perversion of it's just so inappropriate to, it really shook her up too, because she was the victim of incest as a child by her stepfather. So she's a sexual assault victim. And then I just saw that whole ugly, I just saw it for what it was. I was like, yeah, that's what my dad is. He's a predator. He beats women and you're a victim. So predators, I'm sorry, but you shouldn't have. I didn't victim blame, but in my head I victim blamed. Okay, so this is getting way off topic. But I was like, you shouldn't have been there in the first place, because I tried, nothing that I have to say matters, so it's just whatever. She initially reached out to me. I didn't know this woman. She was my stepmother's best friend, and she lived in Pennsylvania, not far from where I currently was living and currently live now. But she reached out to me to beg me to come down there and help my father. And then my father did that to her. And then it was like, okay, do you need me to explain now? So all of a sudden, in this deep, dark void that I was in, I had this new mother figure. And that's what she called herself. She and her husband adopted me as their spiritual daughter. And what happened was, over the course of that winter, between, the beginning of November and New Year's, when I was in this darkened, depressed state, I went to see them, and one day I thought I was going to see them, but Rick picked me up at the bus station, and rather than us go to their house, we went to the ministry. And I was ambushed by all of these evangelicals whom Patty had informed she was working on me. She was evangelizing to me. Because they did something. They would pray. They prayed over me over the phone, and within that took away the suicidality. I wanted to be suicidal, but I couldn't anymore. That's how bad the depression was. So then I got ambushed, and people laid hands on me. And because this depression wasn't like a cry, people don't understand it. I wasn't crying. I wasn't not working. I wasn't sleeping all day either. The way the depression manifested was I snapped that day, and then every day after that, I was just like, I'm done. I'm gonna leave. I'm done. I give up. I'm done. I felt so thwarted as a human being that I guess you could say it was like the depths of self-pity. But for me, it just really felt like I'm done. And I would say I'll give myself till January 20th. And then I would just be like, okay, I'm done. And basically every day, all day, I was quite productive. I worked a lot. I was actually teaching ESL again online, and I worked like a workhorse. Weird, weird, weird. I would work, and then I would do transcription on top of that. So I was working like 50, 60 hours a week in isolation in my room, smoking when I could. And then I would just be like, basically from the moment that I woke up until the moment that I went to bed, if I wasn't directly focused on a task, I was thinking about killing myself and how much of a relief that would be. And I was like, okay, well, and then I just told Patty and Rick, like, this is where I'm at, can't take it anymore. And they prayed for me, and they prayed over the phone, and then I just couldn't be suicidal anymore. And I swear to you, people will say, yeah, you're crazy anyway, but like, I had the flu one weekend when I went to see them, and I swear to you, Patty has healing powers. Patty has a healing gift. She would call it a gift of the Spirit. I would just say, there's something about this woman. She took the flu out of my body. I felt it leave. I literally felt this rush and then heat, and then it was like the fever broke. She broke my fever. Now, so a lot of stuff like that was going on at that time, and when they laid hands on me at the ministry, I broke down crying, which is something that I had been unable to do in my depression. I actually couldn't cry. The depression took the form of this really dry, obsessive resolve to end my life. And then I wasn't sad. I wasn't crying. I was just numbed out. Unbelievably numbed out. And then they were just proclaiming that they loved me and God loved me. And in hindsight, that was the healing, that was the power, because I had been abandoned and I had been alone and I had been in grief and I had been tortured with guilt and I had been rejected and I had been told that I was not worth a damn by so many events and people in that previous year. And I didn't have anywhere, and I didn't have any more human connection in my life anymore. And that was probably why it was so bad. And when they did that, then you have this powerful infilling, and you have this, they call it, a filling of the Spirit. You get but really what it was the powerful salvation, not of my soul, but of my mental health. But then later it became about my soul, which is really, really, it's a problem. It's problematic. So what happened next? This is getting long, so I'm going to break it up. And so if you're with me thus far, tune in for part 2.